A while back, I spent a week thinking about poetry, which is unusual for me. Now, I would like to share three poems with you. The first is The Maidservant at the Inn by Dorothy Parker. It's queer, she said. I see the light as plain as I beheld it then. All silver-like and calm and bright, we've not had stars like that again. And she was such a gentle thing to birth a baby in the cold. The barn was dark and frightening. This new one's better than the old. I mind my eyes were full of tears, for I was young and quick distressed. But she was less than me in years that held a son against her breast. I never saw a sweeter child, the little one, the darling one. I told her when he smiled, you'd know he was his mother's son. It's queer that I should see them so. The time they came to Bethlehem was more than 30 years ago. I've prayed that all is well with them. I really like the maternal tenderness, the maternal love that's shown in this poem. The narrator is a servant who identifies with the young woman. The poem marks the passage of time, the star she saw then and sees now, the barn that has been replaced, the narrator having matured. Most of all, there's that twist at the end. After more than 30 years, the narrator prays that all is well with the mother and child at a time that we know Jesus was being crucified. I don't know much about Dorothy Parker, but my impression is this poem is not representative of her other work. She is known better as a satirist for her wit and her wisecracks. My exploration of poetry left me wondering about copyright, which protects, for example, authors' rights to determine who can perform their poetry, with those rights typically expiring some decades later. Do I have the right to perform Parker's poem? It turns out that Dorothy Parker left her estate to Martin Luther King Jr., someone she had never met and who was surprised to hear of the bequest. The estate was to transfer to the NAACP in the event of King's death, which proved tragically to be less than a year later. There's an interesting story about how the literary executor of Dorothy Parker's estate, longtime friend Lillian Hellman, was not actually all that keen about sharing Parker's work. There is a link to that story below. Anyhow, I wrote to the Dorothy Parker Society and half a dozen offices of the NAACP. 2 days later, I got an email from a law office saying that the poem was, in fact, in the public domain, and I was welcome to use the poem. For the second poem, I want to give some background. My wife, Judy, was hospitalized for 4 years before she passed away. During that time, there was considerable friction in family dynamics. So at Judys Memorial, the kids, 6, 9, and 10 years old at the time, and I felt socially isolated from everyone else there, including other family. I also wanted to remind you of a verse that appears 3 times in the Bible. It appears first in the book of Jeremiah. A voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping. Rachel, weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because her children are no more. Ramah was a town whose inhabitants were descendants of Rachel, a biblical darling. The verse appears again twice in the Gospels in reference to Herod's slaughter of the innocents, the slaughter of all infant boys in the town of Bethlehem, only a few miles away from Ramah. A Non-Traditional Living Creche by Eugene Loh. It takes a village to raise a child, even more to raise 3 children, especially when mother is hospitalized. No one raises children alone. But let's forget all that for a moment. Let them stand there by themselves, a non-traditional living creche. No young mother with child, father standing in the shadows, but father with children, mother in the casket. There is the sound of crying, children weeping for their mother and refusing to be comforted because their mother is no more. The soundtrack that enables our grieving. The third poem is by a teacher at Pacific Grove High School who has coached a number of poetry out loud state champions. I want to begin by explaining that in my family, we deal with a lot of chronic pain. We have exercise balls and foam rollers, physical therapists, MRIs, cardboard boxes elevating our computer screens. We remind each other about posture. We limit certain physical activities and worry that pain might debilitate us further. Recently, my son took interest in the book, The Mind-Body Prescription by Dr. John Sarno, who claims that most chronic pain has psychogenic origins, that the mind produces pain in order to repress internal rage. I also wanted to remind you of Mark 2. There, Jesus is teaching a crowd. He is interrupted by 4 people who bring a paralytic, a paralyzed person, to him. Jesus looks at the paralytic and says, "Your sins are forgiven." Later, he adds, "Stand up, pick up your mat, and walk." The final background is that there is a poem by Yeats called The Second Coming. The poem was written in a time of great despair, the aftermath of World War I, Yeats's pregnant wife's convalescence from a nearly fatal bout with the Spanish influenza, and the beginning of the Irish War of Independence. The poem concludes with the phrase, "slouching towards Bethlehem," a phrase that Joan Didion also used to title a collection of her poems. Spine Surgeon by Lawrence Hagquist. You come in brokenness, reporting pain at level 10, stabbing, as you say, like an ice pick. Piercing the center of your soul, it cripples your will, your body parts too, and leaves you groping for a cure. I trust you know you're searching for a miracle in me, but I am no forgiver of sins and cannot heal your stabbing pain. Only the other brokenness, reminal stenosis, laminectomy, 8-week recovery, these will help you to lift up your mat and walk, but leave you perhaps still slouching toward despair.